Today's video is all about Social Security spousal benefits. As you might be aware, you can collect Social Security benefits based on your spouse or even sometimes your ex-spouse's earnings record. The problem is the rules are pretty confusing and a lot of people are flummoxed when it comes to the best time to file for those benefits for themselves. So in this video, we're going to cover everything you know about Social Security spousal benefits. We'll even cover a hypothetical example of George Costanza and Susan Ross, as if they had been married for a long time. If you're a fan of the show Seinfeld, you might know that Susan made a lot more money than George did. So we'll cover a couple different filing scenarios for George and Susan. One as if they filed for benefits based on their own record, and then another where George utilized these spousal benefits for their combined advantage. So real quick, we should probably start with a short refresher of how Social Security benefits are calculated based on your own earnings record before we start talking about spousal benefits. Well, if you've been paying into the Social Security system for at least 10 years or 40 quarters, they don't have to be consecutive. If you have 10 years worth of earnings history paying into the system, you're entitled to some sort of Social Security benefit. And the way it works is when you go to file for your benefits, the Social Security Administration takes a look at the highest 35 years of earnings and they adjust them all for inflation and average them out. Once they determine your average 35 highest years, they take that and they run some calculations to determine your primary insurance amount. That's the amount that you're entitled to every single month from the Social Security office if you file for benefits at your full retirement age. Your full retirement age for people who are filing now is going to be sometime between ages 66 and 67. So if you file at your full retirement age, you're entitled to 100% of that primary insurance amount. You can file as early as age 62 if you want, and by doing so, the Social Security Administration is going to reduce the check that they give you permanently underneath 100% of that primary insurance amount. So if you file before your full retirement age, you get less than the primary insurance amount. If you file after the full retirement age, you get more than the primary insurance amount. And every year that you postpone, you can postpone up to age 70, it's an 8% bump every single year. Now let's talk about spousal benefits. So spousal benefits are a great deal because as long as you've been married to your current spouse for at least 1 year, and as long as they're already collecting their benefits, you could be entitled to 50% of their primary insurance amount. It doesn't matter when your spouse files, your spousal benefits is 50% of their primary insurance amount if you file at your full retirement age. Now, just like your own benefits, if you file earlier than your full retirement age for spousal benefits, and you can file as early as age 62, the Social Security office will reduce the benefit that they're paying you. So if you get 50% of your spouse's primary insurance amount at your full retirement age, they'll give you 32.5% if you file at age 62. It's reduced for every single month you file before your full retirement age. Now, unlike your own earnings, so your Social Security benefit based on your earnings, remember, you can delay and wait until after your full retirement age, all the way up until age 70, and you benefit by doing that because they'll increase the check that they give you every month. There is no such credit for spousal benefits. So if you're married and your spouse is already collecting their Social Security benefit, if you're relying on spousal benefits or expect to, there's no reason to wait beyond your full retirement age because you're just missing out on checks that you could have been receiving. Now, what's even better than all this is you can even file for Social Security spousal benefits based on an ex-spouse's record. The rules here are that you have to have been married for at least 10 years. You cannot have remarried since then. And if that's true, you're eligible for spousal benefits based on their record. They don't have to have filed first. They don't even have to know about it. You don't need their permission or anything. If this is true, you just walk down to the Social Security office and file for spousal benefits sometime between the ages of 62 and your full retirement age. This is all confusing. There's a whole lot of rules, so let's look at a couple of hypothetical examples of George Costanza and Susan Ross as a married couple. So let's start with George. George is 64 years old. Let's assume he was born on January 1st of 1960, making him the age when he might start to think about when he should file for benefits, how that fits into the rest of his financial plan. Now, George had a relatively modest career. He had a bunch of different jobs. He worked for the Yankees for a while as the assistant to the traveling secretary, I think. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that he made a very modest amount over the course of his career. He didn't start making any money until he was 30. He worked for a couple of decades here, for about 25 years, and made a very modest amount, which means that if Susan makes substantially more than him, he might really want to focus on his eligibility for these spousal benefits. Now, Susan made more money than he did. Let's assume that Susan was also born on January 1st of 1960. She's 64, and she made a lot more money here. So here are the earnings histories for George and Susan over the course of their careers. And what that means is that they'll have substantially different primary insurance amounts. When we run the math on that and we take all those years of adjusted earnings and apply the Social Security calculation to determine the primary insurance amount, George will be entitled to a little bit more than $21,000 a year, or about $1,740 per month. Susan will be entitled to almost $48,000 per year, or almost $4,000 per month. So if they both file for their benefits on their full retirement ages, Susan will be entitled to $47,000 and change. George will be entitled to only $21,000. Well, half of $48,000 is closer to $24,000. And George is earning less than that based on his own earnings record, which means that he'd be entitled to a spousal benefit to get him to 50% of whatever Susan's benefit is. So there's a few different strategies that George and Susan might want to consider here. And one thing that's relevant that we haven't discussed yet is what's called a survivor's benefit. So if George is collecting Social Security benefits that are lower than what Susan's collecting, and Susan dies first, George is going to be entitled to 100% of the higher between his and Susan's benefits for the rest of his life, not both. But what that means is that if Susan elected to wait until age 70 until she filed for benefits, she would get more every single year. Instead of $48,000, she'd collect closer to $58,000 per year. And if she dies first, then George would continue collecting that amount for the rest of his life. Now, in this scenario, what happens between now and then? If George elected to file at his full retirement age, 67, and then Susan postponed for a few years to allow her benefit to grow, that means that in those 3 years, George would not be entitled to claim any kind of spousal benefits, because remember, one of those rules, your spouse has to be collecting benefits in order for you to be able to collect a spousal benefit. So for those 3 years, George would be collecting the benefit based on his own earnings record only. And then as soon as Susan files, his spousal benefit would then kick in from that point forward for the rest of his life. And if Susan dies first, he would simply collect this benefit, his survivor's benefit, and no longer collect a spousal benefit. So one question that always seems to come up when we talk about Social Security spousal benefits is, can I file for my spousal benefits, but wait to file for benefits based on my own earnings, and perhaps allow those to grow a little bit and file at a later date so I get a bigger check? The answer is no. You used to be able to do something like that, but since 2015, that's no longer an option. The Social Security Office now has what's called a deemed filing rule, where when you file for benefits based on a spousal record or spousal benefits or based on your own earnings record, you're deemed to have filed for both of those benefits. And the way the Social Security Office looks at it is they always pay you benefits based on your own earnings record first. And if your spousal benefit is greater than that, they pay you the difference in terms of a spousal benefit. So what that means is if your own earnings record would result in $1,000 a month check, but your spousal benefits are $1,500 a month, they're going to pay you your own benefits first. They'll give you $1,000 for your own benefits and an extra $500 in spousal benefits to quote unquote top you off. So here's what that means for George. Let's assume that George files a little bit earlier, closer to the end of 2024 when he's still 64 years old. Well, by doing that, his retirement benefit is going to go down because he's filing before his full retirement age. If Susan files at her full retirement age, it's not like George can simply file earlier and then collect the difference in terms of a spousal benefit when Susan does file. In these first few years, Susan will not have filed yet, therefore he's not entitled to any kind of spousal benefit. And since he is locking in a lower retirement benefit based on his own earnings, he'll still receive the same spousal benefit by filing earlier that he would have by filing later. The right filing strategy for George and Susan and the right filing strategy for you depends on a whole lot of other factors. So don't make your Social Security decisions in an effort to just maximize cash flow or just maximize your lifetime benefit. This decision cannot be made in a vacuum. It needs to be made within the context of the rest of your financial plan. That being said, here's a couple data points you probably want to consider. Well, number one, you should explore different types of filing strategies and determine how that's going to impact your cash flow and the need to take money out of your other retirement savings on a year-to-year basis. The longer you wait to file for Social Security, the more money you might need to take out of your portfolio assets until those checks start coming in, and that might be too much pressure on your retirement income distribution plan. On top of that, a lot of people want to maximize the present value of future benefits. And this is what we're looking at right here. If George and Susan take their ordinary strategy that they were considering initially of George filing at 64 and then claiming his spousal benefit when Susan files for benefits when she turns 66, 67, the present value of George's benefit would be over $500,000. The present value of Susan's would be over $1 million. Their total present value would be about $1.6 million. But if they optimize their scenario for present value, they can squeeze more juice out of the same Social Security benefits. It might mean that Susan needs to file later. That's what this would entail in this circumstance. She would need to wait until she's just about 70 in order to maximize the value of her benefits. But doing that gives them more than a $100,000 increase in present value. That could be beneficial, but it may or may not be congruent with the rest of their retirement income plan and the rest of their financial needs. That's it for today's video. I hope this was helpful. Social Security is complicated and there's a lot of rules. Nonetheless, I hope it was helpful. Let us know what we missed in the comments below, and make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel so you get notified anytime we publish something new.